This is Rick DiPietro. You might know him as one of the biggest draft busts of all time, or you might know him as the goaltender who retired over a decade ago, but is still getting paid until 2029. Either way, you probably don't remember his name for anything good. See, in the NHL, a goalie going number 1 overall is unheard of. In fact, it's only happened on 3 occasions in NHL history. It first happened back in 1968 when the Montreal Canadiens selected Michel Place. But despite being a Habs draft pick, Place started his NHL career in St. Louis with the Blues. Well, actually, although he was with the Blues, he spent most of his 2 years with the Blues affiliate team in the Central Hockey League, the Kansas City Scouts, where he actually became the first professional goaltender to score a goal in the history of the game when he scored against the Oklahoma City Blazers in 1971. After that, Place's professional hockey career was very unremarkable. He played games with the Blues, the Scouts when they made the move to the NHL, the Penguins, the Colorado Rockies, the Nordiques, and then he got back to the team that drafted him and played some games in Montreal. He ended his career with an .881 save percentage, a .337 goals against, and 298 games played between 1970 and 1982. Now, Place didn't have a stellar hockey career by any means, but the 1968 draft class wasn't exactly generational, as only 9 of the 24 players selected ever saw NHL ice, but still not an ideal number 1 overall pick. Most recently was Marc-Andre Fleury. Now, I'm sure his name is a little bit more recognizable than Michel Place, and that's because of the Hall of Fame career that he's put together thus far. He was drafted as the first selection in the 2003 entry draft by the Pittsburgh Penguins, in a draft that was insanely stacked. I mean, 16 guys in this draft class have over 500 points in the NHL, and looking back, that's tied for the most in a draft class since the 1990 class. Now, I'm highlighting this because Fleury went first. He was selected before all those superstar forwards and defensemen, and while in a 2003 redraft he may not go first overall again, that does not discredit what he's done in the NHL. Throughout his 21-year career that's miraculously still going, Fleury has done everything a goalie could do in the NHL. He has 3 Stanley Cups, a Vezina, a Jennings Trophy. He's the 4th goalie in NHL history to play at least 1,000 games, and he sits just 2nd in all-time wins, right behind Marty Brodeur, who some consider the best to ever play the position. Now, going on 40 years old, Fleury is still playing in the NHL, and even though he's seen less starts over the past few years, he's surely lived up to the hype of being a number 1 overall pick. And in between Place and Fleury is, of course, Rick DiPietro. Drafts in the early 2000s were different than they are today. Despite the actual draft not changing too much, the way teams thought about the draft and went about drafting has changed. See, 20 years ago, the conventional thought was that you need a great goalie to win a championship. They were thought of as quarterbacks, and it wouldn't be uncommon for a team to reach in the draft if they were lacking a goalie and saw one that held some potential. This ideology came from the fact that, at the time, the NHL was dominated by superstar goalies. The last 10 goalies to win the Stanley Cup leading up to the 2000 draft were Tom Barrasso twice, Patrick Waugh twice, Marty Brodeur twice, Mike Vernon, Mike Richter, Chris Osgood, and Ed Belfour. And out of those 7 goalies, 5 of them are in the Hockey Hall of Fame, and the other 2 are easily in the Hall of Very Good. So with this in mind, and the Islanders getting rid of Felix Potvin, Roberto Luongo, and Kevin Weeks, they were certainly lacking in between the pipes. Then GM Mike Milbury made history by selecting Rick DiPietro out of Boston University, making him the first goalie selected first overall since 1968 when Michel Place was selected. So what made DiPietro so special that he went first overall? Well, Milbury highlighted his standout puck handling skills, his aggressive play style, his leadership skills, and above all, his confidence. And DiPietro definitely had confidence, and maybe it was a little bit too much. His AHL goalie partner, Wendell Young, once joked to Sports Illustrated that he'd need 2 seats on the plane, one in coach for his body and one in first class for his ego. But that ego was immediately shot down as DiPietro posted pretty bad numbers in his first season with the Isles. But even before the season started, things were not looking too good. He pulled his groin in his first practice with the team, missing 4 preseason games, and it was unfortunately a sign of things to come. His highly anticipated rookie season saw DiPietro record just 3 wins, while posting an .878 and a 3.49 goals against average, in a season where the Islanders finished a league worst 21-51-10. So you can't really blame DiPietro for his horrendous rookie season. He played on the worst team in the league, and he was 19 years old, which is young for an NHL player, but even younger for an NHL goalie, a position that sees a lot of late bloomers. The Islanders had just one 30-goal scorer that season, and their defensive core was young and inexperienced. Kenny Johnson, Zdeno Chara, and Roman Hermlich all finished with a plus-minus at or below -20. So DiPietro was the last person to blame for the dumpster fire on ice, which was the 2001 New York Islanders. DiPietro spent the rest of his rookie season in the AHL with the Chicago Wolves, but his numbers didn't really improve much, managing just an .880 save percentage in 14 starts. But at least the pressure was off of him a little bit. He stayed in the minors for the entire next season. With less attention on him, he bounced back, posting a solid .913 save percentage over 59 starts. He also played 20 more games in the playoffs, helping the Bridgeport Sound Tigers reach the AHL Finals, where they lost to the Wolves in 5 games. Then the Islanders gave DiPietro another shot at the starting role in 2002-2003, but he struggled yet again, only starting 10 games with an .894 save percentage. The team sent him back to the minors and quickly turned to veteran Chris Osgood, who honestly didn't fare much better. So while the Islanders were having a rough time, DiPietro was thriving in the AHL. He put up a .924 save percentage, and it was one of the best in the entire league. So with another successful AHL season, DiPietro finally looked ready to handle an NHL role. He made 50 starts over the next season and put up an impressive 5 shutouts and a .911 save percentage, which ranked ahead of some names like Nikolai Khabibulin, Olaf Kolzig, and Thomas Vokoun. So it seemed as though DiPietro was finally coming around. And who really expects a 19-year-old goalie to come in and dominate the NHL? Of course, he's going to need some time in the minors to adapt to professional hockey, and it did wonders for him. In the 2005-2006 season, after the lockout, DiPietro took a slight step back, but it wasn't anything crazy, winning 30 of his 63 starts with a .900 save percentage. Even though his numbers dipped, the Islanders were much worse without him, only winning 6 games for the rest of the season. And even with the mediocre season, the 24-year-old goaltender made the United States Olympic team for the 2006 Olympic Winter Games in Italy. DiPietro was the starting goalie for the US, winning just 1 game in his 4 starts, losing in the quarterfinals to Finland. So at this point in Rick's NHL career, he had 143 games played with just 58 wins, a .900 save percentage on the nose, and almost a -24 goals saved above average. And this was enough for GM Garth Snow to throw all the money he could at him, and he decided to sign DiPietro to a $67.5 million contract over 15 years, the longest the NHL has ever seen. The record-setting contract would pay him $4.5 million a year until he was 40, ensuring DiPietro was an Islander for life. The contract was signed on September 12, 2006, which is now known as Rick DiPietro Day in the world of hockey, but for all the wrong reasons. The contract didn't start off too hot, as he suffered from a mild concussion after a collision against Canadiens forward Steve Begin in March of 2007, and then a few short weeks later he suffered yet another concussion against the Rangers, which caused him to miss the remainder of the season. And it caused him to miss the remainder of what was the best season of his career. During the 2006-2007 NHL season, DiPietro posted a .919 save percentage and a 2.58 goals against average with 5 shutouts. So despite the injury, the contract seemed to be paying off, as much as a 15-year contract could pay off. The next season was injury-prone as well, and this was when DiPietro's career dove off a cliff. He played well enough to make the 2008 All-Star game, but this is where his season would end. In a nothing, just-for-fun shootout competition, DiPietro sprawled out to make a save, and while mic'd up on national television, he lets everyone know that he re-aggravated a hip injury he had suffered.
Flying the goal is a great creative way to try anything,
You want me to go?
right? Anything goes.
Yeah, I just f***ed my hip up again. Yeah.
Good thought there.
In March of that year, he had surgery on that hip, and then a few months later, he had surgery on his knee. DiPietro started the 2008-2009 season mostly watching from the bench, sitting out for the first 4 games of the season, before finally getting the nod in Florida for Game 5. He managed to play 2 more games, but had to leave early in his 3rd game back. After that, he was put on injured reserve with an undisclosed lower body injury. Then on November 1, it was revealed that he had undergone yet another knee surgery after hurting his meniscus, but it wasn't clear if it was the same knee that he had already been operated on earlier in the year. Then, unfortunately, GM Garth Snow announced that Rick DiPietro was done for the season due to post-surgery swelling in his right knee. He returned in January of 2010, but just 2 months after that, he was put on IR due to swelling in his knee, causing him to miss the remainder of the season. He started the next season surprisingly healthy. That was until he broke his jaw in a goalie fight in February of 2011, which kept him off the ice for weeks.
By DiPietro, but DiPietro and Johnson.
DiPietro started the following 2011-2012 season, but things went south fast. During practice before the third game, he took a hard shot to the mask from Brian Rolston and got a concussion that sidelined him indefinitely. He came back late in October, but shortly after that, he injured his groin, and it turned out he needed surgery for a hernia, which ended his season for good. After playing just 3 games in the lockout-shortened 2012-2013 season, DiPietro was waived by the Islanders and sent down to their AHL team, the Bridgeport Sound Tigers, even though he still had 8 years left on his NHL contract. In his first game with the Sound Tigers on March 1st, 2013, things didn't go so well for him. He gave up 2 goals on the first 2 shots and then let in 5 goals the rest of that period. Then, on January 1st, 2013, the Islanders announced that they were putting DiPietro on unconditional waivers to buy out the rest of his contract. 2 days later, the buyout was finalized, with DiPietro agreeing to get paid 2/3 of the $36 million he was owed over the next 8 years, which would give him $1.5 million a year for the next 16 years. But with DiPietro still wanting to play hockey, on October 25th, 2013, he signed a professional tryout contract with the Hurricanes AHL team, the Charlotte Checkers. He then went on to play his first game just 5 days later, stopping 25 of 29 shots in a 5-2 loss to the Grand Rapids Griffins. He was cut by the Checkers on November 26th, ending his professional hockey career for good. So, although Rick DiPietro was considered a bust, he left a lasting impact on how teams approach drafting goalies. When the DiPietro experiment began to fail around 2007, teams became more cautious about selecting goalies in the first round. From 1994 up until 2006, there were 36 goalies taken in the first round, with at least 2 selected in all but 2 first rounds, 2003 and 1996. The NHL even saw a stretch between 1999 and 2005 where 9 goalies were drafted in the top 10 across 7 years. So, on average during this period, 2.7 goalies were taken in the first round each year, with 0.85 goalies drafted inside the top 10. However, from 2007 to 2024, the trend shifted significantly. After witnessing DiPietro's struggles and the fallout from his massive contract, teams became more conservative. In the 18 drafts from 2007 to 2024, only 12 goalies were selected in the first round, with 10 first rounds passing without a single goalie chosen. No goalies were drafted in the top 10 during this period, with Yaroslav Askarov being the highest at 11th overall in 2020. This averages out to just 0.67 goalies per first round and obviously 0 in the top 10. Now, there's a lot of reasons for this drop-off, but the main one is that the goalie craze from 1994 to 2006 lines up almost perfectly with the start of the dead puck era. Back then, defense was everything, and teams likely felt that having a strong goalie was worth the risk. In 1995, there were 4 goalies taken in the first round of the draft: J.S. Giguere, Marty Biron, Brian Boucher, and Marc Denis. 3 of them became NHL starters for several seasons, and all 4 played over 300 games at the NHL level. This success probably made teams believe that drafting the top goalies was a surefire way to get a quality netminder. That belief stuck around for a while, but things started to change after a bunch of top 10 picks between 99 and 06, like Brian Finley, Brent Kahn, Dan Blackburn, and Al Montoya, didn't quite live up to the hype. Now, that's probably the main reason, but you have to think that the whole situation around Rick DiPietro and his contract made teams think twice before using their first selection on a goalie. Rick DiPietro is still involved in hockey today, hosting a radio show on ESPN with Dave Rothenberg and frequently working as an analyst for NHL games. However, he's definitely doing this out of the love of the game because he doesn't really need to work, as he's still getting paid $1.5 million annually until 2029, thanks to what many consider the worst contract in NHL history, but I'm sure Rick doesn't see it that way. So, was Rick DiPietro a bust, or was he just super unlucky? I guess in technical terms, he is a bust. Drafted first overall, never really breaking out, and then leaving the game just 13 years after being drafted. But it wasn't his fault, as he was plagued with reoccurring injuries practically his whole career. And just as he was hitting his stride, it got worse. Remember, he had a season where he posted a .919 and was 8th in Vezina voting. Many thought if he never got injured, then he would be amongst the greats of the generation with the likes of Hank and Carey Price. Now, I don't know if he would have gotten to quite that level, but he was definitely on the right track. Instead, he's more remembered for his infamous contract than for what he accomplished on the ice.